What a difference a snap makes, especially when the snapping fingers are in a gauntlet bejeweled with all the powerful Infinity Stones. Without them, snaps usually just keep beats or remind the cat that it's not allowed on the counter. Get down. Oh, that cat knows. Oh, it knows. The snap ended the threat of Thanos and also left an Iron Man hole in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's only natural for people to want that hole to be filled, but it's also natural to assume it would be filled by Tony's plucky protege Peter Parker, the spectacular Spider-Man. The answer might not be what people assume. Ooh, mysterious. Not every hero gets a phrase or saying that's associated with them, and not all of them are dripping with meaning. They can fight for truth, justice, and the American way. They can be vengeance and the night. They can be the best at what they do, and what they do isn't very nice. Not many of them have a saying that ends up being quoted in Supreme Court decisions, though. While we don't get the words in the Marvel Cinematic Universe's version of Spider-Man, the idea that with great power also comes great responsibility is at the core of who Spider-Man is. Or as Peter puts it to his mentor-to-be Tony Stark, when you can do the things that I can but you don't, and then the bad things happen, they happen because of you. It's something so ingrained in the mythos of Spider-Man that it's hard to think that it could be ever overlooked. Spider-Man Far From Home invites us to ask the question, will Spider-Man be the next Iron Man? It's a big question. Iron Man left a big imprint on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and not just by being the one who started it. By the time the first Avengers movie rolled around, Iron Man already had 2 solo movies and a post-credits cameo in another character's solo movie. All told, Tony Stark appeared in 3 solo movies, 4 Avengers movies, and as a supporting character in 2 other solo movies. With that post-credits scene in The Incredible Hulk, 9 of the 23 Infinity Saga movies that had a Tony Stark movie. But it's more than just a repeated use of the star power of Robert Downey Jr. Stark's shadow is cast across the entire MCU. While Thanos might have been pulling the strings during the Infinity Saga, the world was shaped by Stark in one way or another. Captain Marvel may have given Fury the idea of the Avengers Initiative, but it was Tony suiting up in power armor that kick-started the plan. His father had helped create the first Avenger, his creation Ultron nearly destroyed the world, and his reaction to the fallout ended up tearing the Avengers apart. More importantly, Tony Stark recruits a young Peter Parker and introduces the poor kid from Queens to the world of the Avengers, only at the worst time. It's easy to draw parallels between Peter Parker and Tony Stark. They're both natural geniuses. They're both living in the shadow of father figures. With Peter Parker looking to Tony Stark as a mentor, when Tony Stark dies, it's natural to assume that the student takes the place of the mentor. However, as Redditor Curious Augment 99 points out, Spider-Man has an arc in both the comics and the MCU that is perhaps different than just filling the role of Iron Man. And it goes to the core of Silver Age comics, Marvel and Spider-Man specifically. Helping define the Silver Age, Marvel Comics introduced a troubled hero, one who was unsure of themselves or had real-world problems that couldn't be solved by shooting I-beams. This means more than just material things like Peter Parker worrying about paying rent or taking care of his Aunt May. Peter Parker has carried the weight of his uncle's words. He's tried to live up to the responsibility that his powers have granted him. But one of the other things that the Silver Age and Marvel brought were the consequences of that kind of power in the hands of people who don't always know what the right thing to do is. Guilt over not stopping the man who killed Peter's uncle isn't the only tragedy that informs Peter. When the Green Goblin gives him the impossible choice between saving a tram full of people or Gwen Stacy, his attempt to do both still ends with Gwen Stacy's death. And that's just one of the tragic moments where Peter wasn't able to save the day. Spider-Man's time in the MCU hasn't been long, and it was almost shorter, because it came off 2 relatively recent Spider-Man franchises that featured perhaps one of the already best-known superhero origins. We didn't get that in the MCU, though it is implied. But his journey in the MCU has been keeping with the arc that Spider-Man has followed traditionally. While the world might have been asking if Peter was ready to become the next Tony Stark, and perhaps even Peter himself, it's a mistake to think that's what the movie was about. Instead, Peter's journey was coming to terms with trying to do the right thing and failing. It's something that has plagued Peter as a comic book character and in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Spider-Man's origins in the MCU were a little rushed. That had a lot to do with the studio not being sure if they could secure the rights to their most notorious character. As a backup plan, they had written different versions with a prominent role for another Marvel icon, Black Panther. By the time Sony and Marvel had reached an agreement, the story with Black Panther had taken root and Spider-Man's role was kinda slid in at the last moment. Regardless, we still got that version of Peter Parker's main motivation. If he has the powers to do things and doesn't, he feels that what happens is his fault. This is the theme that worked its way through Spider-Man Homecoming and Spider-Man in the MCU. Peter sees the effect that Doom's weapons are having and feels he needs to do something. Even if he can't seem to get the attention of his mentor and the Avengers, this is what drives him to action, but also puts him at odds with his mentor. The big moment, of course, is the attack on the ferry, where not only does Iron Man have to step in, but Tony is mad enough about what happened that he asks for the Spider-Man suit back. As much as he and Rogers were fighting, some of that must have gotten through, because he sure sounded a lot like his work rival when he told Peter that if he's nothing without the suit, then he shouldn't have it. We always fight the hardest against the people who are telling us something we need to hear, right? The connection to Steve Rogers is not accidental. The entire MCU has actually been an exploration of the various paths Earth's mightiest heroes take to assume the role of the hero. Steve Rogers goes from someone who is essentially looking for something to sacrifice himself for to finding something to live for. Tony Stark goes from being selfish and ego-driven to finding that big sacrifice. Thor comes to terms with the role destiny plays in his life and whether it shapes him or he shapes it. Bruce Banner has to come to terms with the destructive nature of the Hulk, eventually merging with his bigger, greener, angrier half. Peter Parker in both the comics and the MCU has found himself stuck between being a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man and being at the center of some of the biggest events. One of Spider-Man's first actions in the comics was to attempt to join the Fantastic Four, mostly because he saw it as a way of both to be a hero and to make their rent. Parker's path to the Avengers in the MCU also mirrors comic book Peter's quest to be an Avenger, one that took decades. Despite team-ups and mishaps with Marvel's first team, Spider-Man didn't officially join the Avengers as a full member until 2005. In the interim, though, the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man would fight against the Kang the Conqueror-built Spider-Man robot, and even the Mad Titan himself Thanos more than once. Similarly, in the MCU, when Thanos' muscle and hype man came to town searching for the Time Stone that lives around Doctor Strange's neck, Peter follows Strange all the way to the Q-ship, stowing away even after Tony tries to bench him. During the fight on Titan, it's Spider-Man's strength that almost pulls the gauntlet off of Thanos. And when things go south, Peter spends his time protecting the other heroes in the fight. During the final fight in Endgame, he takes the death of Tony Stark as if it was a failing on his part, that if he could have done something to stop it. This doesn't lead him to hanging up his super suit and trying to become a regular teenager full-time, but it does give him hesitancy. This informs why Peter is reluctant to even bring his spider suit on the trip with him to Europe. In Peter's mind, he's been a failure so far in his bigger adventures. He was unable to stop Captain America in Civil War, he lost to Thanos on Titan, and during the final battle in Endgame, he wasn't able to prevent Tony Stark's death. In fact, his only success so far as he's concerned, is that he stopped the Vulture, and only after having Tony Stark fix his mistakes. It's not a leadership role that Peter is afraid of taking. It's a larger responsibility without Tony or someone else there to fix his mistakes. This is something that a lot of superhero fans can probably relate to, popularly referred to as imposter syndrome. When it seems like a passing joke, the name of the glasses that Nick Fury, or Talos posing as Nick Fury, gives Peter Parker, Edith, or even Dead I'm the Hero, is the antithesis of Peter Parker's point of view and exactly why Far From Home isn't about Spider-Man becoming the new Iron Man. Even before he donned a suit of armor and privatized world peace, Tony viewed what he did as part of the greater good. Selling weapons funded his other projects like medical research and sustainable energy projects like the arc reactor. Tony's quest wasn't about reluctance to be a hero, but rather to find out what it meant to be a hero. When Peter gets those glasses, the first thing he does is almost kill his entire class. For Peter, this is the verification of that imposter syndrome, that he's not ready for the responsibility, that he can't do the right thing without making mistakes. The only Tony Stark he saw was the confident Tony Stark, the one who controlled the room and saved the day, the Tony Stark that seemed like he was in control. He never saw the Tony Stark that hid out in a garage, afraid that his mistakes had endangered his loved ones, or even the Tony Stark that was so consumed by the guilt over the damage caused by his creation Ultron that he went to war with his teammates even though Peter was recruited for that fight. The guilt and doubt means that he doesn't trust his instincts or those around him. In the broad sense, it means that handing Edith over to Beck, and in the specific sense, it means that he loses touch with his actual superpower that is his instinct, his spider sense, or Peter Tingle. He gets back in touch with that when he calls the only person he thinks he can trust, Tony's best friend Happy Hogan. It's what Happy says to Peter that solidifies that Far From Home isn't about Peter or anyone becoming the next Iron Man. Of course, Peter isn't going to be the next Iron Man. Even Tony couldn't live up to being Iron Man. For all his bravado and external confidence, Tony was, in Hogan's words, all over the place. He doubted every move he made. Peter Parker then didn't have to come to terms with filling Tony's shoes, but with the idea that even when you try to do the right thing, you won't always succeed. This is quintessentially Spider-Man's journey. He's not becoming the next Iron Man, but the first Spider-Man. This is the burden implicit in Uncle Ben's iconic advice. With great power also comes great responsibility. The weight of that responsibility hits Peter every time he fails to save someone. It was important for Peter to learn that lesson in Far From Home, as the mid-credit scene sets up another iconic part of Spider-Man's journey, being a hero while the public, or specifically the Daily Bugle, works against him. This time in the person of J. Jonah Jameson outing Peter Parker as Spider-Man. That's why Peter was never meant to be the next Iron Man. What are your thoughts? What role does Spider-Man play in the larger universe? What's the most important part of Peter Parker that makes him Spider-Man outside his powers? Let us know in the comments, and while you're there, why not hit that subscribe button? The only thing that happens is there's latest videos in your inbox. So go ahead, click the button. See you next time.